Hello class, we are group 3. Today we will analyze the case about East Coast Yachts goes public. First, let's quickly review the case. The company has been facing fast growth. However, the fast growth makes the company's growth can no longer be funded by internal sources. So the management think it is time to take the company public. Usually firms go public for two main reasons. One is to raise capital. Another one is to create a publicly traded asset. Then the company started to contact with the investment bank to know more about IPO process. IPO, which is called initial public offering, which means the original sale of a company's securities to the public. Actually, IPO processes are regulated by the United States Security and Exchange Commission. In this case, the company should pay relevant fees associated with the IPO, such as underwriter fee or banking fee, legal fee, SEC registration fee, and so on. Next, for IPO, the company should disclose important corporate information. The company needs to provide 3 years' worth of audited financial statements. For question 1, what are the differences in the expenses to the company if it uses a Dutch auction IPO compared with a traditional IPO? What IPO should the company choose? The following table shows the differences between these two IPO ways. For Dutch auction IPO, it is a public offering auction structure. The price of the offering is set after taking in all bids to determine the highest price at which the total offering can be sold. The benefits and characteristics for Dutch auction IPO are: first, makes investors be willing to buy in terms of quantity and price. Second, will attract more potential investors. Third, company can raise its true capital valuation and not leave funding on the table. And last, increase pricing efficiency and reduce underwriting fees. For traditional IPO, underwriters work with the company to come up with a price that they believe is a reasonable valuation. There are also some benefits and characteristics for traditional IPO. It cannot reflect the true public demand for the shares. It is a highly biased process, as investment banks would make decisions to maximize the underwriting fees, and it can reduce risk. So for the company, I suggest that it should go public with a Dutch auction, because using Dutch auction will cost lower underwriting fees. Traditional IPOs of common stock are underpriced. However, a Dutch auction will not be underpriced. And also, Google used the Dutch auction before, so it can be regarded as a good example.
Hey guys, so for question number 2, it's asking, during the discussion of the potential IPO and East Coast Yachts future, Dan states that he feels that the company should raise $75 million. However, Larissa points out that if the company needs more cash soon, a secondary offering close to the IPO would be potentially problematic. Instead, she suggests that the company should raise $100 million in the IPO. How can we calculate the optimal size of the IPO, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of increasing the size of the IPO to $100 million? Well, to address the first question, it would be hard to calculate the optimal IPO just based on the information given in the case. There's a lot to consider when calculating the IPO. A couple things we can do to get an estimated IPO is to look at the company's financials and the market or industry that it's in. When we take a look at the company's financials, we want to make sure of the progress of the company. We can do this by analyzing the cash flows or the balance sheet to get an idea of how the company's growth has been as a private company. With an idea of how the company is doing internally, we can take a look at how the company would do in the public market. We want to take a look at how the industry is doing in general and to know if the company would be entering in a time where the stocks are cheaper or if it's the optimal time for entry. Getting an idea of what the stock market is like for its competitors will help us calculate the IPO and ensure that the company will not be under or overvalued. Having an underwriter to help with this would be ideal so it can be assessed whether or not the company could be promoted during times of favorable stock. Now, to get more in detail, let's take a look at the next slide and we can see what the advantages and disadvantages of increasing the size of the IPO would be. So here we can see a couple advantages and disadvantages for increasing the IPO. Some advantages would be increased liquidity, increased price per share, and having required funds for investing. Having a higher liquidity gives the company flexibility to acquire cash if necessary, in terms of if something were to happen to the market or the company. Price per share increasing would not only make the shares more valuable, but would also make, in turn, the company more valuable. Lastly, having the required finances for investing is important for long-term growth for the company. With these funds, they can begin to invest in long-term assets that could potentially help the company in the future. With these long-term assets, they could possibly bypass any barriers that they couldn't financially do as a private company. On the contrary, there are some disadvantages. For example, one disadvantage would be that the underwriter did not benefit or would not benefit in the open market. The underwriter may not benefit if the IPO is too high because in the open market, the higher stock price would not benefit them. Underwriters would not only be getting the IPO subscription price. Having the IPO subscription price being lower than the open market price would leave their price to be, in a sense, less valued in comparison and would have gained almost nothing valuable from this. With higher stock prices, they may also become too expensive for investors. So take this into consideration. This company is still a relatively new company. A normal, quote unquote, investor would not buy an expensive stock for a company that they've barely heard of. This would leave the company with very minimal investors, and being unknown doesn't really help its cause. Investors want to buy share for a lower price and hope that it grows, but they don't want to buy for a higher price, like higher than the industry norms, and hopes that gets even higher than that. The last disadvantage would be that the more money you're looking to raise, the more that's going to cost. Due to things like processing fees and marketing fees and other fees that could add up, this would cost the company more than help it with its IPO. One thing to be careful of is that the amount of money that you're raising isn't going to cause you to spend more than you raise. So in doing so, it would be counterproductive and lead the business to a rough start upon entering as a public entity. Now from here, I'll be passing it off to question 3 and we can take a better look as we keep going.
Question 3 asks, after deliberation, Larissa and Dan have decided that the company should use a firm commitment offering with Crowe and Mallard as the lead underwriter. The IPO will be for $85 million. Ignoring underpricing, how much will the IPO cost the company as a percentage of the funds received? The fees and expenses and the costs related to them are listed in the table shown. Legal fees and expenses amount to $1.8 million. SEC registration fees is $15,000. Other filing fees is $20,000. Fees related to the listing on the NASDAQ amounts to $100,000. Transfer agent fees amount to $8,500. Engraving expenses are $525,000. Other initial public offering expenses amount to $75,000. Underwriting fees is 7% of the initial public offering of $85 million, which amounts to $5,950,000. And in order to register with the SEC, they must provide 3 years of audited financial statements. Each year is estimated to be $325,000, multiplied by 3 years amounts to $975,000. So total fees and expenses is $9,486,500, and this amounts to 11.14% of the 85 million funds received.
As an advisor to the employees, I would suggest them not to invest in the initial IPO offering, because as individual finances are slightly different from the management decisions that are made for the company investment. I would advise employees to sell in the secondary market after the 180-day lockup period expires. And just like the management and the investment corporation wanted to evaluate the financial statements of the company 3 years prior to the IPO offering, it would be very practical and important that the employees also look at the performance of the company after, or at least during the IPO process, when the initial investments are coming in. It would better help them to decide if the seemingly successful path that the company is on would sustain through and after the IPO, or if they would face any downturn and eventually run the risk of losing their investment. This is also because the finances of individual employees, or their aim is slightly different. Of course, both the aim of a company investing and an individual investing in a company is the same, which is to generate financial gain and revenue. But the decisions that a company management makes are slightly different from those of an individual deciding about investing, because the company is focused on expanding the business, improving the quality of its products and services, and of course maintaining an edge in meeting industry standards. But an individual's or an employee's investment in that company, whether it's their own or even if it's an individual investing in a company of their choice, not necessarily the one they work for, it is different because they are looking for investing solely for the purpose of gaining financial revenue, and then using it for their own personal purposes. While companies can use creditors and other outside investors, they do not have that individual personal stake when managements make the decision. Of course, these are decisions that affect their jobs, but an individual's investment is slightly different, because the individual is actually taking out money from their pocket in the hopes that they'll be getting more eventually as revenue, not necessarily affecting the mechanisms of the way that the company or its operations are run. So it would be better to not just rely on the decision of the management, because the management is making the decision for the company. It does not take into consideration each individual person's investment.